Welcome to this episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess. I'm Eric.
And I'm Angie.
We are married with a ton of kids.
We have 6 kids total. He has 3 and I have 3.
My name's Hallie and I love riding horses.
I'm Lexi and I love agriculture.
My name's Carter and I love eating.
My name's Chase and I love lifting weights.
My name's Summer and I love spending my parents' money.
I'm Dane and I love baseball.
Our show is about our blended, blessed, and always a mess life. And our hope is if you find yourself in the same situation we are in, that by sharing our story, all the fun and all the mess, the challenges we are experiencing, it will give you some inspirations, laughs, and community, knowing you are not alone in this mess.
We appreciate you spending time with us. Let's dive in.
This episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess is sponsored by the second book in HP's legacy children's book series called Are You With Me? It's a sequel to Feathers Matter. Only this story is about being curious and brave by facing the thing you are most afraid of. And by doing that, you just might discover the love that others might have known all along. Curiosity over comfort zones all day long. Pre-order Are You With Me on our Blended, Blessed, Always a Mess website today. Books ship out in mid-December. Welcome to this week's episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess, where Angie and I are really excited because this podcast for us is as much about healing, I think, as it is for trying to help so many people. And Angie does a great job of finding people to try to help her. And so over the last several months, she started following this account on Instagram and she kept telling about how it resonated with her. And like Angie does, she builds connection. That's just what, from the time I met her over 5 years ago, she is someone who builds connection with other people very well, especially other females. Because if you've listened to the podcast for the last 3 years, you know Angie's all about female power and we're making it work. And so she has found today Rio Richards, who is a grief and trauma therapist, joining us from the great state of California. So Rio, welcome. We are so glad to have you.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you both.
Awesome. Yeah, I think when you're going through something difficult, I mean, it could be a divorce, an illness, single parenting, or the ultimate loss of a loved one, or worst case scenario, a child, you search for community, whether you recognize it or not. You're searching for that space where people understand you. You read something, you think, oh my God, that's exactly how I feel. They must know exactly what I'm going through. And it's reassuring because you're not alone then in that scenario. You could be surrounded by people, but if they don't understand what you're going through, it can feel isolating. And so there's this level of appreciation and empathy too, of like, okay, they know. So to Eric's point, there's a ton of awesome information on social media. And I started following this account a while back called And That's Grief. And there's so many awesome posts that just like resonate with me. And so the other day I'm like, you know what? I'm going to reach out to her. I would love to have her on the podcast and talk about her experiences and just maybe unpack a few key topics that really resonated with me that you've shared recently. But before we dive into that, I would love just, Rio, maybe share your story and share with our listeners more about you and maybe even where to find you too. I mean, obviously there's Instagram, but you also are a therapist as well. So
Yeah. Thank you. So my name is Rio. I am a grief and trauma recovery therapist. I am licensed in California. I also work as a grief support and integration coach nationally and internationally. I was a therapist when my dad was diagnosed with cancer in, that would have been the end of 2019. And so not only did my world change very rapidly overnight, but very shortly after that, the entire world changed. We were all thrown into COVID, and it was a very stressful and chaotic time trying to work as a therapist online, supporting other people, and then supporting my dad as he battled cancer and ultimately lost that battle in March of 2021. And I think what brought me to this work were the changes that I experienced that I couldn't explain, and I couldn't find the reasons why I was going through what I was going through. And not everyone is like this, but I am the kind of person who I really want to know why. My brain craves to know what is going on, why is this happening? And once I have some understanding, then I can tend to whatever it is, how I need to. But that real search for why am I suddenly so angry? I'm having conflicts in all of my relationships since my dad has died. And that's never happened before. That's not, quote unquote, who I am. So I had this complete reorienting of what felt like my personality. And then I also felt just generally completely disconnected from my life as it was before, although my life looked generally the same. Like the world kind of looked the same. My dad was gone, but nothing felt right. And so it was that real search for, what is this experience and why have I not heard anyone describe it in the way that I'm experiencing this right now? I'm not saying the information wasn't out there. I didn't even know to look for it, but I think that's what really brought me here and to creating, this account. And I guess I'm making what I thought would be helpful for me as I went through this.
I should not even be surprised at this point that Angie has stumbled upon another like soul, because as soon as you said, not everyone's like this, but I want to know the why, I was like, and I'm talking to my wife again. Here we go. This is what we're going to do, because Angie very much, she wants to know the why. Somehow in my life, I've gotten to a point, and I'm not doing things correctly. I don't mean that at all. I'm just saying I've given up on the why, I think. Yeah. I'm just like, I don't know. It is what it is. But Angie very much searches for the why. And so I know it's not just you, Rio. It's not just Angie. But why don't you guys speak to that just a little bit, if you would?
Well, and I think, Aric, maybe you're alluding to more of like, why did this happen to me versus why do I feel this way? Like, what is grief? And I think, Rio, that may be where you were going to. Like, when it happened to me, like, I wanted to know what the grief process is. Like, tell me how to get through this. What's the steps? What's it going to feel like? So I can be prepared and I know how to navigate it. And I mean, the therapist I was going to at the time looked at me like I was total nut job. Like, yeah, it doesn't really work that way. It is messy and it's, going to follow this path, and everybody's different and unique at how they handle it. And there's definitely a lot of why. Obviously, I ask why all the time. Like, why my daughter? Why did I, have to go through this? But I do spend a lot of time trying to process everything that you feel, because it is, no one talks about it though, to your point. I don't feel like people really open up to how it actually feels on the inside, because they hide it. They don't share a lot. Yeah. And I don't know. It helps me to like think through it and talk about it.
Yeah. And I think that it's so natural when you think about it, when something and someone important to us has been taken away from us without our consent, and all of a sudden our world looks completely different. Our relationships are different. We feel different. Nothing makes sense anymore. Of course, our brains are going to search for, like, what the F is this? Like, what is happening? Why is this happening? What do I do about it? That instinct to gain some sort of control in a place and in a time where you have zero control over what has happened and then how your body is responding to it. I like to come from that place of really, just that makes sense. And I think an ironic part of the healing process, and I try to balance this, I try to do this dance as best as I can with the things that I put on Instagram, but part of that balance is learning how to not need the why to tend to yourself and what you're going through. And so I think I'll speak for myself, and, a lot of the work I do with clients is learning how to be with uncertainty and how to be with those challenging emotions and not need the why in order to take care of ourselves. But I certainly did not start there. And I was very much seeking the why in all ways.
Because that might be one of the biggest unravelings when you go through grief, is this sense that you used to have control and now you have no control, when in reality you never had control, but you had this like false sense of it until it happens to you. And then you realize, like, we're literally in control of nothing except how we choose to live every day. But there's very little
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard to grasp once you experience it, because you know it. Like, I think everybody fundamentally knows, like, oh yeah, we're not going to live forever, blah blah blah. But like, until it really happens to you and you experience it on such a personal level, I don't know how real it is to people.
Yeah, and I think and maybe we'll talk about this today or not, but I'll say a piece about grief anxiety. I think that so many people that come to see me, and this is something I certainly experienced myself, are really confused at how on edge they constantly feel now after going through something like that, and how much anxiety exists in just the day to day. And they're like, I wasn't a person who was really on edge or snapping at people, and what is this? What's going on? But I think to your point, now, your body knows now that this is possible, that people you love can die and be taken away from you out of order when they're not supposed to, and so how do you exist in the world with that kind of knowledge now? That's a really big ask of one human who has to go to work and take care of their family and show up for their relationships that's so that knowing, it's like, how could we not feel anxious knowing that that's possible? And so it's hard to learn how to trust the world again. Sometimes I describe it like, significant loss is like you're walking along, and like you're saying, that death is a thing that happens and we all die and we're not going to live forever. But significant loss is like this chasm just opens up in front of you, and you fall in it, and everything falls in it. And then you're kind of crawling your way through to a world that looks a little different, but kind of the same. And then you have to trust to live in that world again, knowing that another chasm can open up and you can fall inside again. And so it's, I
think that
That's a
kind
great description.
It really is, because it is that fear of, oh my gosh, this could happen to me yet again. I know how bad this felt before, so I'm terrified of it happening again. And then I think that segues into one of the topics Angie wanted to dive into today that she's talked about a little bit on our podcast. Her and I talk about it often, and that's the masks that especially Angie has to wear, right? So you mentioned a minute ago, you've got to go to work and you've got to take care of family. And so during your grief process, you oftentimes put on this mask so that people don't see what's really happening. And Angie and I talk about it a lot, because she's like, I can take it off if you want to see it. And I'm like, I do want to see it. But then I know she thinks I don't want to see it. So there's you don't think so? I don't know. That's what we're talking about.
I think early on, there's no need for the mask, right? Early on, 6 months, year into your grief process, everybody's around you. Everyone knows what's happened. They feel it too. But after a little bit of time has passed, and this is just my experience and how I feel, it's what I put on myself. I have other kids. And so that pain will never go away, ever. It will always be there. I will always replay what happened and how horrific it was to feel and see my daughter take her last breath. But after a little while, you got to cover that up. And because I lead a team at work, like I have kids, I have all of these other responsibilities that I have got to mask up to get through the day. And I don't know if that's the right or wrong thing to do, but I think in order to protect people around me, otherwise I would be a hot mess. Like deep down, I just want to stay in bed and cry all day still, and it's 2 years. So I have to fight through that, but like it involves kind of putting this mask on to be able to just get through the day. And I don't, it's like putting that good face on, which I think you might have shared something about that. And then you have the holidays coming up, and there's also that aspect of it. Like, it's joyful and the kids are excited, and my twins are getting ready to turn 16 next week and driving. And it's like all of this. And so it's a layer that you put on so that everybody else can move forward. I don't know if that makes sense. Do you feel like you've had to put mask on?
it makes perfect sense what you're saying. And I think that there are a couple pieces that come to mind when I hear you speaking about that. One being, I think, so I like to think of our tasks after grief as the two tasks of healing to rest and action to rebuild. So we are learning who we are in the wake of their absence, and then we are rebuilding a daily life without them. And so I think that a natural progression is that you find yourself in the action to rebuild as time goes on. And I think that that's the thing that other people are seeing, is that we are in this rebuilding, we're in that action energy, and they start seeing less of the resting to heal. And we might be spending less time in that resting to heal phase. It doesn't mean it's not in the background and always ongoing. But I think that's a really big challenge for so many people, is that I've heard it described in this way before, and I'll use this analogy too with clients, that, in those early months, early years, and 2 years would be considered very early for a lot of people. In those early months, early years, you have sometimes that blanket of support or understanding around you. And then after a certain amount of time, it's like the blanket is ripped off. And you're like, where did everyone go? Where are my comforts? All of a sudden I'm thrown back into the world again, but I'm not ready. I'm not done, with this grief, and I'm not done figuring out how I exist without my person and how I do this all. And so sometimes what I'll offer there is, it might, as time goes on, take more intentionality to create those spaces where you can rest and heal, whether that's rituals or creating an altar, or just getting more intentional about, am I giving myself space to grieve? Am I giving myself space to be with her and feel connected to her? Because daily life is just going to keep going.
Keep going. Yeah. The world's going to keep spinning. And I agree. Like, when I feel like I get super anxious and it's really, really heavy, it's because I have not carved out that time, me time, to really feel like I'm spending it with Hallie. And we are surrounded. We have got an amazing community, and we talk about Hallie a lot on here. So we've got a great support system. And like I said, I feel like this is also what I put on myself, is like, I'm supposed to move on. Like, that's what I'm telling myself, is like, oh, well, okay, it's been 2 years. Like, I need to put a face on so that people, don't feel the heaviness. And I'm not a burden in some aspects, right? Like, I think that's a common feeling a lot of people have too, is like, they don't really want to see me that sad. Like, I wouldn't want to see me that sad. I don't want to see me that sad, but like, I can't do anything about it either. That was all out of my control. So the mask definitely at this stage feels like something I intentionally have to like take on and take off, type of thing.
And that feeling like a burden to others, I think, is one of the main topics that I talk about with clients or in my coaching groups. It's, how do I tell someone I need help when I don't even know the kind of help that I need? How do I expect people to, show up for me in my sadness when it's not something that I even really know how to sit with? It's really confusing trying or allowing people in when we're not quite sure how to sit with ourselves in that too. But I think, I think unfortunately a big task for grievers is sometimes learning how to communicate with our safe people and people we trust in different ways, maybe in ways we've never had to before. I mean, it requires a huge, level of vulnerability and risk to say, hey, I know I seem fine and I'm trucking along, and I just want you to know that sometimes I have really bad days and really hard days. And is it okay if I reach out to you on those days? I mean, that's so vulnerable to say, even to people we love and trust and have known forever, and so I think, it's hard. And none of it's fair. It's not fair that a griever has to then also learn how to be vulnerable to get and seek, the support that they need. But sometimes that can be the biggest help, is how do we let other people in? that's been a struggle for me for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know just for us, I say, well, I'm like, what can I do? How can I help? And I don't know. She'll go, I don't have anything. I don't know what to tell you. And then I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
That's my answer. I'm like, you can't fix it. Like, I don't know what to tell you to do because there's no fixing it. And that's, I feel helpless.
I thought that's why we had Rio on today. Was she was going to, no?
Surprise.
Oh,
yeah.
My fault. My fault.
I have a 4-step approach to how to fix grief that I will hand you. You can link it in the show notes.
Perfect. We'll give Angie the why, and I love it. All right. Fantastic.
The why and the how, and then we're done. We're good.
Well, something else that you had shared, that this was probably, I think, the biggest shock to me of going through this process is what grief does to your body, like physically, mentally. Obviously, you know, the emotional side of it, like, okay, this person's going to cry a lot and feel all these things, but the physical side of it, oh, holy cow. Like I had no idea. And I don't think people recognize or realize how much it can destroy you physically.
Yeah.
I mean, I've gone to the doctor more in the last 18 months than I've ever gone in my life. And because I have pain in my lymph nodes that I've never had before. And to the point where I convinced myself I have every disease possible, right? To where my doctors finally are like, we've checked you for everything possible. Stop.
Yeah.
It's grief. It's stress and it's grief that is causing you the pain. Angie's a lot tougher than me. So she just deals with it and just rolls. Right. But for me, I've never been in like pain in these parts of my body to where I was like, well, I must have this, that, or the other thing. And when Angie's sharing with me what you are sharing on social media, it makes me feel better of like, okay, it's grief. It's got to be grief. These doctors aren't crazy. They must know that it's the toll of losing someone and that pain that comes with that.
Yeah, that physicality of grief, I think, I don't know if I've met one griever or client who wasn't shocked or just totally surprised. Like, what is this? What's happening to my body? I've spoken with and I've seen people who their faces change. Their faces physically change. They look different, after significant loss, after that amount of stress and grief and pain and cortisol and fear, and the toll that the body takes when you are overwhelmed is huge. And that can look different ways for different people. But I think that something that helps me sort of anchor in that understanding is the phrase that emotion is meant to be in motion. And if you think about grief, it is just like a tidal wave of feelings and confusion and fear all at the same time, all nonstop, all ongoing. And that level of intense energy moving in your body, if it doesn't have anywhere to go, i.e., if we are just going day to day because we have all of these responsibilities, but we are not helping it move, it will find ways to move. And that's often through that exhaustion or pains or, extreme fatigue and muscle tension and migraines and even illness. And so, our bodies are so smart. They're so intelligent and they are trying to get it out in the ways that they know how. And so it can be really powerful when we start learning how to help emotion move.
What are, like, when you're working with your clients, what are ways that you recommend helping that emotion move rather than just trying to carry it and lock it in?
I think that learning how to name and not be afraid of our feelings is a big first step. So am I feeling anger? Can I allow myself to just be with that anger for 60 seconds? It can be a really simple practice of just, can I be with this? Can I not make myself wrong for feeling this way? And how do I get curious about what it needs? And so this, in my work, that whole conversation shifts to the nervous system. And how is my body and my nervous system always working to protect me? If it's anger, I know that I am in a sympathetic fight or flight state. That means I have mobilizing energy running through my body. So how do I mobilize to release it? I think a lot of information out there is sort of this like, oh, if you're upset, just take some deep breaths, just ground yourself. You'll hear a lot of that, but there's a lot of steps that can be missing there. You can't go from my body either wants to fight danger or run from it to I'm just going to take some breaths and, pretend the danger's gone or hope that that feeling goes away.
I don't know about you, but those just become angry deep breaths. So.
Yes. You're just rage breathing at that point. Yeah. So I think a lot of it is practice. Like when I'm feeling that anger, for me, sometimes I will focus on that sensation where I feel it in my body, whether that's a thought that's coming up or a memory or an interaction I just had someone that just really pissed me off, or I'm just, I'm feeling that anger for whatever reason. Focus on that and I'll push as hard as I can into the wall. And I'll just stay there for a moment. And then I'll kind of back up and see, how does that feel? Okay, maybe I need to pull on a blanket, but it's how do I move that energy and then do those nourishing, grounding things like, okay, do I need to go on a walk? Do I need to step outside for a moment? Do I need to connect with someone I love and feel safe? So often I'll look at it as how do we move it? And then how do we call in safety? But that is a way that we can start working with that emotion.
Yeah. I think that is also something challenging, is trying to really listen to your body.
Yeah.
And what is your body really telling you? Because I feel like I'm in fight or flight all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And cortisol levels, like it's just been insane. We've had a trial. It's just been like big stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But in my mind, if I try to listen to my body, it's telling me you are so tired.
Yeah.
But then I also feel like, well, if I listen to it, that means stay in bed. And like, that's not me. Like, I know I got to get up. I'm fighting every day to show up and not lose this battle. Right. Like so I struggle to get out of the fight mode, but I am so exhausted. So it's like, I don't know what I'm actually supposed to listen to.
Yeah.
The exhaustion or like keep going. It's hard.
It's really hard. And I think you're also speaking to just survival mode. And sometimes we don't have the luxury to slow down and tune in and practice, and sometimes it can be, I have 5 minutes to rage on the page and get out this anger and verbal language or yell into a voice note, whatever it is. That's how I can move it. I'm not going to worry about listening or kind of fine tuning those pieces. How do I just let it move and just see if I can like release that pressure cooker valve just a little bit. Sometimes when we're in survival, that's enough, is just making it day to day with as least overwhelm as possible. You're speaking to that. I think often in grief, we bounce between the fight or flight and then the shutdown. Nothing feels safe. So fight or flight is mobilizing energy that has fear in it. And shutdown is that immobilization energy that also has the fear in it. Like both are protective, and part of healing is how do I have that mobilizing energy where I'm functioning throughout my day, but there's not fear attached to it. And then also, how do I rest where there's not fear attached to that, where it becomes a shutdown and I can't get out of bed.
Yeah.
But again, that can take a lot of patience and just learning about your own unique nervous system and how you respond to stress. But yeah, survival mode is sometimes just a different story.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Eric and I have talked about this a lot too, but for me to really rest, it's when I take time and I'm like by myself, because then that like is safe to me, because I can just literally be. And that was hard early on to try to ask for that or make sure that I have that, because when you're surrounded by people that want to help, that can also be offensive a little bit, right? Of like, what? You don't want me around. And so it's hard to really ask for what you need. But I think there's this isolation component to it all where you are surrounded by a lot of people and community. I call it painful beauty, right? Like I use that analogy, that word a lot because I think it describes so much of grief is like, it's so painful, but then there's beautiful parts and how people surround you and rally around you and really give you what you need is beautiful. That part's beautiful. And you go through this numb, shock, despair, like all of that over time. Like we've talked about, the world kind of moves on. And I think a lot of people do go inward. You go inward because it is that protective mechanism. But how do you know when that's a safe thing to do or when it's like unsafe to you and you're isolating too much?
Yeah, I think that's such a profound question that I hear come up a lot. And I think it comes back to that tuning in and that awareness of where you are and where your body is, because I think that solitude is something that so many grievers do need. It can feel very hard to be around people, even our supportive people, knowing that they want to help, but there's a certain pressure of, I have to give you the answers to how to help me, and I don't have those. And I am filtering myself, even though I'm trying not to, because I don't want you to get overwhelmed. There's just this natural masking, that happens, especially for those of us maybe that, are used to being the strong ones or that people rely on,
like she knows you. She knows you.
Yeah, like, we're so connected. I bet we have the same Enneagram.
Yes, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
and
going to
so
be getting a note that's like, hey, I'm traveling out to California to see my friend Rio. And, okay. All right.
I'll be back next month. I've got therapy I have to do.
We've got an intensive that we're doing. Yeah. So that, grief requires us to be vulnerable, those of us that are the strong ones, in ways that we've never had to before. So that solitude can feel safer. Absolutely. And then that line between, is this solitude or am I starting to self-isolate too much? I think there's that nuance of, is this now coming from a place of fear of connecting with others, of, essentially, is this part of that shutdown? Am I withdrawing out of fear of engaging with others? And I say kind of fear is an overarching, like, does it just not feel safe? Or is this nourishing to me right now to be alone? And so I think when we can sort of look at the cues that our bodies are giving us of why we're in that place, that can be really helpful information to kind of gauge, is this helpful or is this a defense mechanism?
Right.
And then I would think too, just build on that a little bit, is that I see where you're, I think this is why grief is so difficult, because I don't know, Rio, if you're familiar with author and public speaker John Gordon at all, but I've read several of his books over the years. He's very much on positive energy. Several years ago, he was not a positive person, very negative. Wife was going to leave him, all these things. And they started doing these gratitude walks, and it's like changed his life. Best-selling author, all these things. And I was listening to a 20-minute bit that he did yesterday on positive mindset and just really how we are created to be in relationship with other people. And so when we go through this grief process where we do need some time by ourselves to realign with whatever it is that we're trying to figure out and find, and that could be different for everyone in their grief space, there's still this like awkwardness, because we do know that internally we are supposed to be in relationship with people.
Yeah.
And so as you are coaching people and that are going through this process, and maybe it's a husband and wife, and we're just, because that's who you're talking to today. Like, how do you then re-engage in I know that there's an isolation, but then there's also a relationship, because you're already in one, but you're trying to figure out how to somehow over time get back into that scenario.
This may or may not apply to us. Just
But just the road that Rio was going down, and the fact that I had listened to this 20 minutes yesterday from John, it tied in. And
Yeah. So I think that First and foremost, you're absolutely, yes, I say that all the time. Like we survive, we thrive with connection to others. We are social creatures. We are meant and wired for attachment. And so more times than not, feeling safety with another person is going to be helpful. Are there times where we need to be alone? Sure. But safety with another person can look like going on a walk and you guys aren't talking, but you're just walking next to each other. It can look like creating a kind of menu, so to speak, of here are some things I know are helpful for me. That might look like, some things on that menu might be sharing stories, favorite memories, about our loved one. It might be you asking me how I'm doing or you not asking and just listening to how I'm feeling. And so because grief is ever shifting and evolving, I think it can be helpful to kind of start to collect the different things at different times that feel helpful and our support people. Typically, I am talking about couples in this scenario. The supporter can come to the griever and say, pick one on the menu. Like, I want to be here for you right now. I'm not quite sure where you're at. Do you want to talk about her? Do you want to just share some space together? Do you want to watch a movie? So sometimes organizing it in that way can take the pressure off of the supporter needing to guess in the moment and takes the pressure off the griever of needing to figure out what they need. So sometimes I'll sort of start with tangible tools there.
I like the concept because I love to go out and eat. So give me a menu that I can create.
You can resonate with the menu.
I can resonate. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, the other, actually, I think today you posted it about the holidays. So, we're in the middle of holiday hell. Is that fair to say? Like between Thanksgiving and Christmas, it's like
the double H.
And for us, it's really hard because Thanksgiving will always forever be changed. I mean, we came back from the hospital and we had presents under the tree already wrapped and it's just the whole thing.
Yeah. Triggers everywhere.
Triggers everywhere and everybody's happy. And so it's just this dance that you had shared. And that's what I read to Eric this morning. Like, this is so spot on for the holidays. So you want to talk a little bit about that because there is this need to rest, but also action and the holidays are definitely triggering. So maybe, and it doesn't even have to be like, I think grief doesn't have to be like, people can experience grief in a lot of different ways. And it doesn't have to be that they have lost a loved one even. Like, we can all be grieving things. So I think even just navigating the holidays are hard for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. You could be recently divorced and you're trying to navigate the first time going, to your family's Christmas by yourself, or like all those things are hard. So maybe dive into a couple of things for people to think about or advice to navigate the holidays and stay true to what you're feeling.
Yeah, I think, just to where you started with this, and I think what I posted yesterday is what you're referring to of those, two tasks of resting and healing and then action to rebuild. And the holidays, often are forcing us to try to do both perfectly and simultaneously. Everything gets condensed, everything is heightened. And this is during a time where all of that just feels so much harder. Grief is like a kind of winter. We do turn inward. Our worlds do get a little smaller. There is a kind of tunnel vision because there's so much pain, there's so much overwhelm. And then the holidays are like, no, you need to be out and engaged and participating and cheerful. And that messaging is everywhere. And so I think what can be helpful is to, first give ourselves full permission to have maybe boundaries and limits during this time that we don't have other times of the year. I think our human brains can get really trapped in this, well, I didn't need this before, so I shouldn't need this now. Or this wasn't a problem for me before, but now it feels like an issue for me now. And I can't change the script on people, in my life in terms of like what I can or can't do. So sometimes it's helpful to just say like, well, why not? Like, you're allowed to change and people are allowed to be disappointed or have feelings about that. But what is your capacity right now, truly? And is that you want to participate a little bit, but you can't do all of it? Okay, great. Let's write down all of the things that feel like non-negotiables for you, or feel like I really know I want to do this. And also I think this is going to be really freaking hard for me to do. Okay, can you go for an hour? Can you speak to the host ahead of time and say, hey, I'm not going to really know how I'm feeling day of. Can I let you know kind of last minute if I feel like I have the capacity to go or not? So there are ways that we can first identify what our limits are and then sort of expand outward from that and let our safe people know, here are my limits. Maybe here are some changes that I need to make during this time. But I think permission giving is just a really big one right now. And holidays can be confusing too, because not every year it's going to feel the same. You might be 5 years out from your loss and be like, oh my God, this feels really hard this year. And last year it didn't. Am I allowed to change my mind of attending this thing? What are people going to think if I say all of a sudden this feels hard for me? So it kind of always comes back to, how can you take care of yourself and let people have whatever feelings they're going to have about that?
That is, I think, the number one challenge so many of us face is what will other people think?
Yeah.
I mean, even, I post about Hallie. There's times I think, do people probably think like, maybe she needs to stop posting so much? Or, you know what I mean? Like, I think we're all wired to care about what people think. And there is an unraveling of all of that. And sometimes, I've shared this before, but sometimes I had someone tell me this one time and I'm like, what did you just say? No way. But he said, grief can be a gift. And that was early on. That was like in February after we lost her in November. And like, no way. But I can see it later on of like more of this awareness. You're operating at a different capacity because you've experienced it. You know what matters. You know where to focus your time. And I think you could allow it to help you not care as much about what people think or turn it off. Because I feel like it's always there for people. I feel like we're all wired that way a little bit. Don't you think? I mean,
yeah, I think
they're not going to stop your actions.
Yeah. Well, I think even when we root ourselves back into how are we always trying to survive, it's staying connected to people. And so grief can feel like, if I am asking someone to hold this too much, are they going to leave? That is the ultimate threat to our systems always, is losing people. And then you have the double whammy of, in grief, that that's possible. And so, yes, we are wired for connection, but simultaneously, we are wired to avoid anything we think is going to rupture connection and attachments with others. And in grief, that becomes our own feelings sometimes. So that's a really hard dance. It's like, of course, you don't want to overwhelm your people. Of course, you don't want to push people away. You need them. And sometimes that dance is, oh, do I need to now mask? Or how do I take care of myself, but also stay connected? And it's this really delicate push and pull sometimes. And that's where I will typically always come back to, how do you have explicit and vulnerable conversations in ways that feel manageable and safe for you with people who are safe, that you trust? Yeah. I forgot the original question. I just went off with that thought.
No, that was
I will
great.
tell you, this
resonates.
just came to me, and you may think this is an awful, awful analogy, but as I was listening to Rio talk,
now.
as I was listening to Rio talk, and I think you referenced it's like you're going back and forth, kind of like a dance in some scenario. It's like when you are learning how to dance, it is really difficult, right? If you're learning how to do a good waltz or tango or whatever that might be, it's difficult. But then after time, when you figure it out, it is a beautiful balance of activity that's happening forwards and backwards. And so maybe it really does apply in that regard. I don't know.
I think absolutely grief is learning. You're learning how to be with yourself and learning how to live life in a way that you didn't ask for, that you didn't want, and that can be exactly to your point, learning anything, it's clunky. You're stepping on your partner's toes. You guys are trying to figure out how to do this together and separately. And it does take time and patience. I'm remembering a thought that I had to what you said a second ago, Angie, and I try to share this on my Instagram when I ask the audience, like, how do you guys feel about this thing? And I try to share all the answers, because what I see again and again is every single griever I've ever spoken to feels like people don't see them anymore after a certain amount of time. They feel like people expect them to move on. They feel like they need to hide. They feel like their grief and their pain isn't welcomed in the spaces that it once was. They feel like outsiders. Everyone feels this way. And so I think that can be a really helpful anchor too. And maybe a little bit of a North Star when we do feel like life is starting to just kind of truck along and there's not as much space for our grief. Can you find other grievers that know what you're going through, or other spaces or support groups or rituals? Like, what are these ways that you can really be in that understanding and that really deep knowing that what you're going through is very valid and normal, and that you're not wrong for feeling that way.
Yeah, I think that's a full circle to how we kick this off, is like trying to find community of people that understand. Like that has been the best thing that has helped me, is when I've connected with other moms that have lost kids, or you find people in like situations that, because there are no words, there really are not a lot of words to describe what a certain loss that you've experienced feels like, unless you can find people that have went through the exact same thing. Yeah. And there's just like, you don't even have to say anything. It's like, okay, they know. They know. And then that puts you at ease a little bit, or a little bit of peace, and that someone really understands how god awful it is, and how to fight forward, right? And give you different types of inspiration or ideas. So that's why I've really appreciated your Instagram. Are there other ways for people to find you or connect with you outside of Instagram? I know you're a licensed therapist. Are you taking new clients? Like, what's other ways people can connect?
Yeah. So anyone can connect with me on riorichards.therapy.com. I have my contact form linked to my bio and Instagram if you want to reach out and set up a short call and see what our options for working together are. Like I said, I offer coaching to anyone outside of California, and then licensed psychotherapists in California. Other than Instagram and reaching out to me that way, I do have a Substack called Touching the Fire. And that is really a deep dive on all of this. And that's where I feel like so much more of that nuanced conversation and what do we do with all of this, I get to really lean into there. And so that's been a really fun sort of creative outlet for me. And it's been really great connecting with people there. Instagram, it's like, okay, how do I make this very relatable yet catchy, yet let me grab your attention in 2 seconds Instagram square post about grief and loss and death. That's sometimes hard to fit all of the nuance there. And so, for all of the deep dive conversations on Substack, it's called Touching the Fire.
So Substack's like blog post almost, right?
Yeah.
To where you write it out and you can subscribe to it and stuff like that.
Exactly. So you can subscribe to it for free. And then I was weekly. I'm moving maybe a little bit towards every other week at this point during the holidays, but it'll be sent right to your email when you subscribe. So you'll get that dose of existential questioning, if that's your thing. I love it. And helpful tools, of course.
Yes.
Definitely. It's been really great to visit with you. We're actually running a little long on time. We always like to wrap with something, each of us just saying something we're grateful for. And so you don't have to go first. If you'd like a second to think about it, we can let Angie go first if you would rather.
I'll jump in.
Okay.
I'll go. So one thing that I am grateful for is to have the ability to cross paths with so many people that share knowledge with the rest of the world. So for you, Rio, especially, like I appreciate your time and being on here, because it just helps so many people be able to walk throughout their day with strength and grit and resilience. And so I'm grateful that I have the ability to connect with with people that share so much goodness.
Thank you. Okay, I'll go. Yes,
Okay,
I am.
dive in.
I am so grateful for people who are sharing their stories like you guys. I think that we would not know that what we're experiencing is normal and valid, and it's okay to be where we are without other people saying, this is what I've gone through, and this is what I'm struggling with, and this is how I'm trying to heal and rebuild. So I'm very grateful for the work that you guys do. And yeah, it's so, so important.
Well, I would just say, one, I am grateful for the time today, Rio. It's been absolutely fantastic. And I think people should definitely follow you because you've started to do that as well. And there's just so much great content that you provide. And for people that are grieving, it'll be great. What I'm grateful for today is actually pretty simple. And it's the fact that it has been like 20 something degrees for days here in Missouri. And today we're into the almost the mid 50s. And for you ladies, as we do the podcast, if we're watching on YouTube at all,
beautiful sun.
I have gone from cloud cover to full sun over the last 10 minutes or so.
You're glowing.
It's what it feels like. But that warmth on my face. Angie and I are diehard. It's why we bought a house in Florida. We are diehard sun people. We love the beach. And so just to feel some 50-degree warmth on my face today feels good. It just feels good. It fills my body with goodness. So grateful for that. I know that's simple, but I am just thrilled about it because it's going to be about half this temperature tomorrow. So soaking it in, and why I decided to record outside today because I wanted to get some fresh air. So
I love it. The sun on your face. That's you can't beat it.
Healing. That's so healing right there.
All right.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
So grateful. Angie, great job.
I know. I find a good one.
She crushed it. She crushed it. And I'm sure people are going to absolutely love this episode. So
thank you guys so much.
For all of you in the middle of grieving this holiday season, I hope that you will follow Rio because I think that it'll be helpful. And we are so grateful for each and every one of you. Hope you have a wonderful week and God bless.
Thank you for listening to Blended Blessed and Always a Mess. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and at blendedblessedalwaysamess.com.
Reach out to us on any of our social channels. We would love to hear from you. Have a great week.